If Islam had ceased to exist 300 years ago, this country would not have lost a single thing. There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
You'll realize that claims like this couldn't be further from the truth. Islam is the third largest religion in the US, after Christianity and Judaism, and is also the fastest growing religion as well. And in 2017, 20 states reported that the largest non-Christian religion in their states was Islam. And as Islam continues to grow, and as Muslims become more affluent and visible and prominent in American society, we find Islamophobes becoming more and more desperate to try to tarnish the image of Islam. They can't handle it that Islam is growing, that Islam is being more accepted in American society. And you have people like Matt Walsh saying that Islam hasn't contributed anything in building America. He treats Islam some sort of foreign religion that came out of nowhere that has no place in American society. He says that there's not a single good thing about America that was contributed by Islam. Now, if you study history and you study Islam's impact on the Western world, when you study Islam's impact on the world, and specifically on early America and the building of America, you'll realize that claims like this couldn't be further from the truth. When we look at the Islamic Golden Age, which was from the 8th to the 14th century, we'll find that Muslims flourished and Muslim thought flourished. And when it comes to the sciences, when it comes to thought, philosophy, and all of these different areas, we find that Muslims excelled while Europe was in the Dark Ages. When we look during this time period, the Muslims in, for example, in Baghdad, they had institutions like the Baytul Hikmah, which is translated as the House of Wisdom. And they would take the manuscripts that came from different parts of the world, like from the Greeks and the Indians and the Persians, and they would take these works and these manuscripts and they would study them and they would improve on these works. We have examples of Muslim scholars and scientists and mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi in the 9th century, who is known as the father of algebra. He coined the term algebra, and he also invented algorithms and he introduced trigonometry. We would not have artificial intelligence, we would not have modern computers in America, let alone the world, without figures like Al-Khwarizmi. We also have Jabir ibn Hayyan, who was referred to by the Europeans as Geber. And we also find many of these figures having European versions of their actual names, so that when you study history, when you study science, you won't even know that these individuals were actually Muslims. Jabir ibn Hayyan, he's considered to be the father of chemistry, and he pioneered experimental chemistry. We find Ibn Sina, who the Europeans refer to as Avicenna. He wrote the Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanunu fi Tib, and this was the standard medical text. This was the medical manual in Europe for 500 years until the 17th century. Ibn al-Haytham, he is referred to as the father of modern optics. He established the principles of the scientific method. So all of the advancements of science in America, whether it comes to NASA, whether it comes to different organizations that utilize science. I mean, look at the scientific advancements that we have achieved in America and in the world. This is because of people like Ibn al-Haytham. And he was also known as the world's first true scientist because of his contribution to science. Literally, the first scientist in the world was a Muslim during the Islamic Golden Age. And his works were influential, and they were cited by scientists like Isaac Newton, Kepler, and Galileo, and others as well. The fact that the Islamic world and Muslims and the Islamic thinkers and the philosophers and the Muslim scientists, the fact that they shaped the ideas that led to the founding of the American ideals that we have today cannot be denied. And this is something that is well attested by historians. We have the historian George Sarton. He stated that the main task of mankind was accomplished by Muslims. The greatest philosopher, Al-Farabi, was a Muslim. The greatest mathematicians, Abu Kamil and Ibrahim ibn Sinan, were Muslims. The greatest geographer and encyclopedist, Al-Mas'udi, was a Muslim. The greatest historian, Al-Tabari, was still a Muslim. And he mentions this in his book, The Introduction to the History of Science. We find that Islam also influenced and inspired the founding fathers of the United States. In 1776, John Adams, he published his work, Thoughts on Government, and he mentioned the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as a sober inquirer after truth. There's also a letter where George Washington, he writes to one of his aides telling him who to hire. And in the letter, he tells him that we should hire anyone who is skilled, whether they come from different parts of the world. He says, and I quote, he says, if they are good workmen, they may be of Asia, Africa, they may be Europe, they may be Mohammedans, which was what he used to refer to Muslims as. He says they may be Jews or Christians or of any sect, or they may be atheists. So George Washington, he welcomed people working in America and also working for him as well that are Muslims. So the idea that Islam was foreign to the founding fathers, or that they didn't even know about Islam or Muslims or didn't welcome them into America, is completely false. In 1797, President John Adams, he signed the Treaty of Tripoli. And in the treaty, it states that the United States has no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of the Muslimen, which he used to refer to the Muslims with, right? So he clearly states, this is the President of the United States in 1797 stating that, you know what, the United States has no problem with Muslims, has no problem with the Islamic religion, has no problem with the tranquility and the peace of the Muslims. So, did the founding fathers not know about Muslims? Did they not know about the Islamic religion? John Adams is specifically referring to the Islamic religion, saying that we don't have a problem with it, right? Thomas Jefferson himself, he had a copy of the Quran. So the idea that they didn't know about the Islamic religion, that there was something foreign and un-American to them, is completely false. He had a copy of the Quran. And in his autobiography, when talking about religious freedom, he mentions different religious groups, and he also mentions Muslims, that they have the right to practice their religion freely in America. So the whole idea that the founding fathers did not have Islam in mind when talking about religious freedom and the right to freely practice your religion in America, this idea is completely false. Benjamin Franklin, he also wrote in his own autobiography that if Muslims were sent to the United States to preach Islam, that we would give them the podium, we would give them the mimbar, the pulpit to teach. Benjamin Franklin, he said that even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send a missionary, like a sheikh, an imam, a scholar, he said even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send a missionary to preach Mohammedanism to us, meaning Islam, he would find a pulpit at his service. He is saying that Muslims are free to practice, not only to practice, but to preach and teach their religion in the United States. This is Benjamin Franklin saying this in his autobiography. This is not us making this claim today. He is saying that the Ottoman Empire at that time, that they could send missionaries, they could send people to teach Americans Islam. So this is not something that was foreign to them. Also, when you look at the slaves, it were the slaves who really built America and built all of the institutions that we have, including the White House and many different institutions. And there are estimates that up to 1 in 3 of those slaves were Muslims. So if you look at the number of slaves brought, which is over 300,000, almost up to 400,000 actually, that means over 100,000 of those slaves were Muslims. And among them, we have even the names of some of these slaves because we have records of them, like Umar ibn Sa'id, who was brought to the US in 1807 as a slave. We also have slaves like Ayub Suleiman Diallo. We have even some of the preserved manuscripts of slaves writing passages of the Quran. But unfortunately, nearly all of the enslaved Muslims and their descendants were either forced into Christianity by their slave owners, or eventually they lost the teachings of Islam because they were not allowed to read and write, and they couldn't educate their society and their children. So because of this, most of the slaves, they lost their religion. And actually, if you look at the civil rights movement during the 1950s and 60s and 70s and onwards, we find a lot of African Americans coming to Islam when they learn this fact, because a lot of people don't know that over 30%, estimates say almost 30 to even more than that, percent of the slaves were Muslims. So we find them coming to Islam because they want to go back to their roots. They want to go back to the religion that was stripped from them and taken away from them. A lot of them, they lost their names and they adopted the names of their slave masters. So a lot of people, they don't know this history. And we need to educate ourselves. Muslims even participated in the War for Independence. If you look at the recorded names of the American soldiers in the American War for Independence, we find one of them being Yusuf ibn Ali. It wasn't just him, it was others as well. But this is just one example. He was a Turkish man living in South Carolina. This is in the very beginning of American history. We have Muslims participating in the American War for Independence. They also participated in the Civil War against the Confederates as well. In the Union Army, we have almost 300 Muslims participating. Estimates range from a dozen to 292 Muslims participating in the American Civil War against the side of the Confederates. We also find that the first country that recognized the United States as a nation, as a country, is Morocco, a Muslim nation. 1 year after the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1777, Morocco formally recognized the United States. And the US also made a treaty of peace and friendship with Morocco in that same year. And in 1778, President George Washington, at that time, the first president, he writes a letter to Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who was the Sultan of Morocco, thanking him and showing appreciation for this gesture of acknowledging the United States. The first country to acknowledge the United States, to recognize the United States, was a Muslim nation. And George Washington sends a letter thanking Muhammad ibn Abdullah. This is also interesting that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his name is Muhammad ibn Abdullah. So the idea that Islam is foreign to the founding fathers and that Muslims contributed nothing to the building of America is completely false. And also, it wasn't just the slaves that were Muslims. It wasn't just, some Turkish people here and there that came into early America and participated in the Civil War and were Muslims. We also had early converts to Islam in America who came from European backgrounds. Historians say that the first Muslim convert to Islam who had a European background was Alexander Russell Webb. And this was a man who learned about Islam on his own. He never met a Muslim, but he started reading about Islam and he wanted to convert to Islam, and he did. And he accepted Islam in 1888. What's also really beautiful and interesting as well is that in Chicago in 1893, there was the first parliament of the world religions in the US, and he attended to represent Islam, and he was the only Muslim to represent Islam in this parliament. Allahu Akbar. So this was in 1893. He wasn't forced into Islam. He was as American as anyone else. And there's also a photo of him as well. You see that he grew out his beard and he died as a Muslim. And there were other converts as well. He perhaps was the most popular of them. And like I said, he represented Islam at this parliament, but perhaps there were many others that accepted Islam that were not as popular. Some people may say, but this was back then. This was in early America. Muslims have done nothing good for America in modern times. And this is also something that couldn't be further from the truth as well. In 1935, the US Supreme Court in their building, they had a frieze sculpted that depicts the 18 great lawgivers of history. These are people that would influence and shape the legal system in the United States. And they also have a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on there, in addition to people like Moses and Confucius and others. When it comes to politics, when it comes to engineering, when it comes to the sciences, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to finance and business, when it comes to the arts, when it comes to all of the different aspects of American society, we find prominent Muslims. For example, we have Fazlur Rahman Khan, who is a Bangladeshi American Muslim. He is known as the father of modern skyscrapers. So the next time you go to an American skyline, you go to an American city where there are skyscrapers, you know who contributed to that beautiful view that you see. Dr. Ayub Omaya is a Pakistani American neurosurgeon, and he also came up with inventions as well, like the Omaya reservoir, which is a device that is used to deliver medication to the brain. We have Dr. Huda Zoghbi, who is a Lebanese American Muslim, and she discovered the gene that's responsible for Rett syndrome. We also have Dr. Ahmed Zuwail, who is an Egyptian American, and he won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1999. And he also pioneered the entire field of femtochemistry, which completely changed the way that we view microorganisms and the micro world in general. Also, when it comes to big companies and products that we use on a daily basis, a lot of these companies were founded by Muslims. The next time you go to the grocery store and you go to the dairy section and you look for some yogurt, you're going to find that one of the most popular brands today is Chobani, which is a company that was founded by a Turkish-American Muslim, Hamdi Ulukaya. And we also find popular entrepreneurs and business people and billionaires like Shahid Khan, who identifies himself as a Muslim. He's the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We also find members of Congress like Keith Ellison and many different people that contribute to the flourishing of American society. What's the lesson that we can take away here? The lesson is that Islam flourished in every single society. In every single country around the world today, we find growing communities of Muslims. We even have some non-Muslim countries today, like China, which has has one of the largest Muslim populations of any country in the world. Muslims have been there for over 1,000 years. And we find Muslims flourishing in all of these societies, integrating in these societies, contributing to these societies and becoming affluent in all of the various aspects of these societies while keeping true to their beliefs, faith, and values. And this is exactly the case for the Muslims who influenced the Enlightenment period. This is the case for Muslims who worked to shape early America. And this is also especially the case for the millions of Muslims in America today. So remember these facts, remember this history the next time you find someone spewing hatred and just saying stuff that's straight up wrong and not factual. Use these facts and remind yourselves of these facts every time someone tries to make the case that Islam is not American or that Islam is somehow foreign and that it is contrary to what it means to be an American. If you learned something new in this video or you found something interesting in this video, and you have other questions, then be sure to include them in the comment section, and inshallah we will address these questions in our upcoming videos. We have regular uploads every single week, so don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and inshallah I will see you in the next one.